Storm 4 is a fascinating game. For starters, it's a sequel to a series of games that took place in the previous generation of consoles, which isn't by any means uncommon with game franchises, but it certainly is in the Ultimate Ninja franchise. Sure, you do have Naruto made SL3, which was released for the PSP unlike the previous two ones, although I think we can all agree that that game is nothing like Ultimate Ninja 4 and 5. Aside from the material adapted and some of the game's mechanics, Naruto made SL3 does not at all feel like a sequel to Naruto made SL1 and 2, the same way Storm 4 did to Storm 3. The fourth title, while choosing to approach some elements of the story differently, it still feels like a continuation of what the previous main Storm games had done, and its overall gameplay still feels exactly like what you would expect from this series of games, which at first it is a bit hard to sink in. I still remember how it felt seeing how different Storm 1 was from the PS2 Ultimate Ninja games, and how much they were pushing to innovate and sever the line between anime and video game. And then I see Storm 4 not really living up to that moment in time, although eventually I came to accept it. It's the final Storm game, so in a way it kind of makes sense for it to feel as stormy as you can get. Still looks better than Shinobi Striker. The other thing that fascinates me the most is the fact that when looking at the main numerical series, Storm 4 is my personal favorite. I love the Storm Trilogy, but I think Storm 4 reigns on top. But that is of course in spite of the fact that Storm 3, my favorite out of the trilogy, does some things a lot better, the majority of them being among the most important elements that really affect my enjoyment of the series. If you look back at my video talking about the trilogy, you'll notice that regardless of how many praises or criticisms I had to offer, the thing that impacted my experience the most was the story mode. Storm 1 was my least favorite mainly because of how disappointing Ultimate Adventure was, and Storm 2 and 3 were both thrilling due to how good the story mode was. Storm 4 is honestly I think the only Storm game I really like, mostly because of its gameplay. Not to say that the story had zero effect on me, in fact, I have a couple of passionate things to say about it. A lot of people would probably go for Generations as an example of what I'm describing. In fact, there are a lot of people who consider that entry to be their favorite Storm, and if you ask me, I see that game as more of a product of its time. Back in 2012, it was in fact the best Storm game in terms of gameplay, with the amount of tweaks and refinements it offered. But looking back, I just feel like it lost a lot of its value because of the things that made it impressive back then were carried on to later ones, and I believe that out of all of them, Storm 4 is definitely the most replayable because of how advanced it has gotten. Now, in my Storm Trilogy review, I kind of just glossed over the support system present in them, aside from Storm 1. The Ultimate Ninja games don't have the best history of giving your teammates much power aside from basic utility. Ultimate Ninja 5 was the first one to introduce a proper one, and you know what, it had its merits. Engaging in both tag team ninjutsu and ultimate depending on which character you selected was pretty dope. Storm 1 added an extra supporting character, additional hits, easter eggs during introductory and victory lines, which was a thing that kind of gave life and value to creating specific teams, but not to the same degree as tag team jutsu, which they had unfortunately removed. When we get to Storm 2, we witness some update. Every time you use supporting characters, it steadily increases your support gauge and it can reach two phases. The first one allows you to engage in melee combos with the assistance of one of your supporting characters if you give them the attack type. When it comes to the alternative defense type, they can cover you every time you recharge your chakra or block your opponent when they try to charge at you. With balance type, they can both assist you when you throw your shuriken and take the hit when your opponent hits you with an ultimate. The additional strikes from Storm 1 now happen automatically and exclusively when the support gauge is high enough. But once you reach the second phase, you have the ability of activating ultimate jutsu with the assistance of your teammates by them adding some initial punches before you're ready to tear your opponent apart with your ultimate. It was a swell feature, but not one that could fully replace what Ultimate Ninja 5 had brought to the table. Storm Generations didn't really do much to improve the system. Storm 3, because they introduced arena knockouts, defense types can push you back into the battlefield. They also gave team attack trigger, which is actually a pretty neat feature in which your teammates do basically the exact same dance during team ultimate jutsu, but unfortunately it has the same problem Storm 1 had with hard punches. It takes too long to charge it to the point where there are only a handful of opportunities you have to actually use it. It's also not super reliable in long distances, which is probably one of the few chances you have to use this mechanic efficiently. No wonder they removed it. But then we get to Storm Revolution, and this is where things start to get pretty interesting. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the infamous split between Ultimate Jutsu, Awakening, and Drive type. This led to some variations in how the support system functioned. With Ultimate type, I think it's only fair to highlight and celebrate the fact that they finally incorporated an actual tag team Ultimate Jutsu that we've been waiting ever since we transitioned to the PS3 generation. The classic Team Ultimate feature from the previous games is still there, and unlike before when reaching it required excessive usage of your teammates with basic L1 and R1, with Revolution the support gauge can also be increased by you taking damage. They also don't simultaneously run to catch the opponent together like they used to. They each take their turns, and if one of them hits first, then it's activated. As for the other support features, well, they mostly got carried out to Drive type, but the way they function was somewhat different. Pretty much all of the classic functions are always active without needing to charge anything. You do have to switch between attack and defense by tilting the analog, and the differences between them are self-explanatory. You can also double click triangle and circle to activate auto mode, which basically allows you to use both modes temporarily, although it does have a chakra cost, which is fair. The other interesting thing is that you don't have to apply one specific role to your teammates. They both have access to each mode, and I guess there's also the seal barrier that was introduced in this game. This actually requires your support gauge to be full. It doesn't really inflict any damage, it just limits some of your opponent's functions. Now, among the different types you're forced to choose, Drive type is probably the most inventive, and honestly, I don't even think it was a bad idea. It was really more so a bad idea to implement in a Storm game for the simple fact that it requires you to exclude some of the most important features that they had already established, like ultimates and awakenings, to the point where they had to be separate selectable systems. It's hard to say if it would even be possible to mix those two things with this new Drive type system they had, although given how they share so many of the same commands, I think it would only really be possible if they were to completely revamp the overall controls, assuming the end result would even necessarily be better than what they had previously built on. It's tragic, but I guess Drive type was just not meant to be, unless you're someone who can tolerate not being able to awaken and use ultimates. When we get to Storm 4, we return to our traditional ways, although for some reason they removed tag combos and instant awakenings. I mean, I guess with the latter I can sort of get it because the right analog served a new function, which I'll get into in a moment, but why did they take away tag melee combos? The funny part is that this feature is still kind of there. You can do it during some instances in story mode, but not free battle. The one thing they did change from the classic ways in the support system was the fact that it's not divided by attack, defense, and balance type. Instead, each character has a unique skill that can range from charge assist, cover fire, strike back, charge guard, dash cut, secret technique substitution, and break guard. Things that might not seem important, but during battles, especially against the right opponents, you have to be kind of careful when choosing which support traits you want. And I can understand how some people might prefer the classic way, but I actually found this revamp to be quite intriguing and challenging in a way that left me excited. Especially because I was witnessing new support skills that were new to this game. But the best addition was leader swap. I'm not sure why it took them this long to add this feature, but god fucking damn it, it made the game so much better. It added new layers of complexity, and I like the fact that you still only have one health bar, unlike in some fighting games where each of your characters have their individual bars. I don't know why, I just like it this way, even if I don't necessarily have an issue with the alternative route. There are fun ways to swap leaders, like immediately after activating ninjutsu during melee attacks, or my personal favorite, doing aerial combos. With how diverse the arsenal of attacks each character can have, how convenient it is to swap leaders, and how fast the overall game is, much faster than the previous games, trust me, I've tested multiple times. With all this in mind, this franchise that was once fairly simplistic without much room to be complex, became more strategic by the time we reached Storm 4. The best way to play this game is via 3-round team match. Trust me, once you do that, you won't be able to play it any other way. Another reason for why I very much appreciate this addition has to do with something I briefly mentioned in my last video. I had an issue with the fact that with every character, each directional combo had literally the same 2 to 3 hits until the last few blows would represent the difference. This wouldn't bother me that much if it weren't for two things. For starters, circle is the only button you have that allows you to engage in a sequence of attacks with the exception of spammers, which limits the amount of potential combos and makes it harder to tolerate recycled attacks. The other problem has to do with combo cancels, a great tool that allows you to inflict more damage, don't get me wrong, but it also results in you seeing the same few attacks over and over again every time you use it. Now, it's not like this was a huge deal for me. I've been able to live with it for long enough, and it also helps that Storm offers beautifully crafted techniques that you can't help but appreciate them, but it's also because I appreciate the audio-visual presentation that when I see repetitious moves, I can't help but get a little bit salty. But thankfully, with leader swap, there's a much bigger room for variety of attacks, especially when in some instances you can replace combo cancels with leader swaps and play pretty much the same role of inflicting more damage. Plus, combo cancels are so much faster now that some characters can have a sequence of attacks where at some point they stomp the opponent to the air, and with combo cancels they'll switch to aerial combat, and it happens so naturally and efficiently. The other thing I want to touch on is Ultimate Jutsu, mainly tag team, in which it works similarly to how Revolution did, except the support Gog has to strictly reach its limit in order to do that. Unlike before where you could activate it without that specific requirement. I prefer it like this simply because it allows me to activate original ultimates, which you couldn't do that before when you picked a team that had a team ultimate, and maybe it's because I'm used to the PS2 Ultimate Ninja titles, because in those games characters could have more than one ultimate and the alternative ones were usually only available after meeting a few requirements, and until then you were limited to the primary ultimate you had since the beginning of the battle. So yeah, this doesn't bother me. Also, unlike in Revolution where tag team ultimates composed of 2 characters were only available when you only chose those specific guys, with Storm 4 if you want to, for instance, see Itachi and Sasuke's team ultimate, even if you were to add, I don't know, Asuma into the team, the ultimate would still be activated. That was not possible in Revolution. It was kind of frustrating. And obviously, since this is a sequel, they added more of these. Some of them are honestly just the most incredibly animated and fan serviceable sequences I've seen in any of the Storm games. There is nothing, absolutely nothing in this world that tops the Akatsuki team ultimate. It's the most badass and gratifying thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And then there's just some ridiculous shit like the 6 Hokage ultimate. That's like, it was honestly just really over the top, but that's exactly why I love it. Also worth noting that awakening actions got transferred to left and right keys instead of L1 and R1 like before, which prevented us from using our teammates' support. There are also some characters like Rikidomata that have pretty interesting awakening tools, and then there's Kaguya, who doesn't even need to be awakened to have probably the most unique set of tools, if you even want to call them that. It's a shame I have difficulties controlling her because she is by far the most interesting selectable character that just has so much variety of tricks and powers at her disposal. Some extra features were added in, several of them previously introduced in Revolution, like the evasive mechanic that used to work in a similar way by double tapping X while aiming your analog to whatever direction you intended to move towards. But ever since Storm Revolution, you can easily do that by just holding R2 and move your player around. It's much more convenient like this because for starters it's handier than double tap, but more importantly, R2 is already used for guarding, so it's very helpful in instances where your opponent is on the offensive, and if you have an opening for escaping the field of attack for your opponent, all you need to do is tilt the analog without ever needing to let go of R2, which in all likelihood you were already holding. We also have guard break items and counter attack, 2 things that work pretty similarly, also introduced in Revolution, and funny enough, it was not very well received. A lot of people hated these new feats. Personally, I'm fine with guard break items. I don't think they're as broken as people make them out to be. You only have 2 of them available, and you can only catch your opponents when they're close range, assuming you'll even be able to successfully catch them anyway. Counter attack, on the other hand, I have somewhat complicated feelings. I like the idea of it simply because it provides to us a good way to react to dash approaches. Not that it was impossible to do that before, but this is a much more direct counter to it, and in some ways safer than guard and substitution. The biggest problem though is that it's way too overpowered. Giving us the ability to essentially immobilize our opponent whenever they try to approach us is just a little too much. And yes, I know it drains our chakra capacity, but I don't think it's that costly. Maybe if they'd reduce the time it takes for the player to be active again, this would be slightly more fair, but there's still the problem of giving us the opportunity to hit the opponent with an ultimate. And yes, I know the damage is reduced, but it's still a lot of health being drained. Storm 4 I feel like made counters a bit more balanced. Instead of immobilizing the opponent, it just blows them away, and if your support Gog is high enough, one of your teammates might actually hit him. Now, I feel like I should also mention that this revamped counter doesn't inflict damage anymore aside from minor chakra reduce, which at first glance feels like it made it worthless since all you're doing is draining your chakra capacity with very little reward. Although this feature can still be pretty convenient, like for example, in instances where your sub bar is critical and you don't feel safe with your opponent nearby. Countering him can give you some brief time to maybe recover your subs, even if it feels too brief, or accumulate some chakra if it wasn't already full. Or just give you a heads up and come up with ways to capitalize on your situation since your opponent still has to get up. Other noteworthy aspects are the depth of the stages. Generally, I find the stages in each Storm game to be kind of bland. I always just find them to be nothing but empty spaces, with each of them simply having different music and skin. The Trinity Exam's final stage is probably the most unique stage, and it's only because it has a lot of trees. Now this issue I have isn't necessarily gone in Storm 4, it's just simply minimized. Launching heated attacks can actually leave marks on the ground, and if you use lightning style jutsu in an area with water, it can actually boost your attacks. Using a fire style jutsu can leave the opponent burning if they get hit, which will drain their health. And there's also armor break, which is pretty great. There's nothing that signifies a brutal battle more than scars and ripped clothes. Speaking of ripped clothes, let's talk about story mode. Now this was exhilarating. It wasn't perfect by any means, and I'll explain soon enough, but it was a very thrilling experience. One thing I'm glad they did was not adapt that shitty text bubble manual skipping style of dialogue that pisses me off. Storm 3 also tried to avoid it, but also still had instances where you were subjected to that. Storm 4 doesn't give a shit, it's all automatic. I think it's partially because story mode doesn't have free roaming, which I felt was justified because it was adapting an arc that mostly took place in the exact same location, and aside from Sasuke, the 4 Hokage, and the rest of his crew, there were barely any moments where characters had to travel from one location to the other. So this entire mode is composed of both cutscenes and battles, all of them thankfully being replayable. But unfortunately, the story has one major problem. A lot of the scenes are, well, barely animated, they're literally just still frames. Now, when I play Storm, I primarily want to witness CG animation. I'm not particularly interested in seeing anime cuts, which aren't by any means major turnoffs. I'm completely okay with the Ninja Escapades modes from Revolution having 2D animated cutscenes, and I love that mode. But in Storm 4, they're not even animated. Sometimes they might add some effects, transitions, slight frame motion, but that's pretty much it. Now of course, we do actually get some CG animated cutscenes, but even those aren't perfect. The lip syncing, while better than Storm 2, I think, it wasn't as tight as Storm 3. There are a few glaring duds, to be more precise, scenes that just look horribly synced. They're not incredibly abundant, and it won't completely take you away from the experience, well, at least depending on what type of person you are, but it's still a bit of a problem. The other issue is that those cutscenes look weird. Sometimes they have a strange bright contrast, the color palettes are bizarre, and I'm 99% certain that those clips have a lower resolution than the ones present during boss battles. Every time you switch from one to the other, the difference in picture quality is very apparent. This time I have no idea why this happened. Usually when the Ultimate Ninja games make off-putting decisions, I try to rationalize and come up with explanations for what could have happened, but right now, I don't have a single fucking clue. I know it couldn't have been a stylistic choice, especially with the cutscenes that look obviously pre-rendered. Maybe things went wrong during the production. You can actually find unused clips of scenes that got canned and resorted to still frames, and the Road to Boruto mode does not have any of these problems. The cutscenes have pretty much the same level of picture quality as the rest of the game, and every one of them are actually animated. But in spite of these issues, I was still never fully taken away from the experience. First of all, before I played this mode, I was already familiar with the abnormality after reading comments and reviews online, so that definitely influenced my expectations. Secondly, this is not the first time I've dealt with something like this. Hero mode from Ultimate Ninja 5 worked very similarly. They like using still frames during dialogue scenes, mainly in the memory fragments that don't have any battle tied in. So in a way, I'm kind of used to this, except Storm 4 has it better because at least they try to have more dynamic cutscenes and it's a lot more rich and tight in the storytelling. Which brings me to my last reason, which is that it still worked. Like, I was invested in what was happening in spite of the broken presentation, and no matter how flawed the cutscenes may have been, the boss battles would always compensate. They were incredibly explosive, colorful, and hella exciting, and I'm not joking about how colorful they are. This is mostly due to how Naruto eventually became less grounded, and the characters developed more destructive and over-the-top powers, which some people weren't fans of that, and while I can understand why some people would feel that way, playing through Storm 4 only confirmed my exact opposite opinion. It's just so fucking epic. Like 8 Gates Guy vs Madara, that boss battle alone is one of the most insane, exciting, and entertaining shit I've ever experienced. Now imagine a couple of more fights like that, some of them even less reliant on typical battle mechanics. Here's another one I really like, Obito and Kakashi against the Rock Ninjas. It allowed us to experience something we didn't even get that much from the manga, which were moments of collaborative combat with Kakashi and Obito. Something that could effectively convey the bond they had and give even more impact to the second collab against Rigado Madara later on. While I'm not sure if Storm 4 has the best boss battles, it definitely has the most diverse ones, with a number of different mechanics at play. There was also wall combat, which actually worked in a way that was much better than what we got from Storm 1, although you're not getting much of it unfortunately. Also, this goes without saying, but the last battle between Naruto and Sasuke, I shouldn't even be saying this at this point, but I highly recommend it. It is by far the best and most emotional clash between them in any of the Storm games. Probably the one issue I have with these boss battles is the fact that I think they're a little too easy. My biggest pet peeve has to do with the quick time events. I think they're less kinetic because the time limit is a tad bit higher now. They're just not as strict with the timing as they were before, which wasn't really that strict anyway if you're already familiar with your joystick, so I was a bit iffy on that. Something kind of funny that occasionally pops up are these sort of goofy expressive faces. The boss battles are a little more stylized when you compare to the past ones. It can at times look kind of gritty in a comic booky way, and the goofy faces sort of come from that. Now, they're not really all that frequent, and to be honest, I just wanted to highlight them because I think they're kind of funny. Though I still love the increase in stylization present here. It didn't receive a ginormous boost, but it was still noticeable. Also, remember when I said that Storm 3 improved the expressiveness of the characters' mannerisms? Well, Storm 4 did that as well, especially during the boss battles. So even though I don't think the story mode here was as tight and consistently well handled as the one in Storm 3, which is why I favored that over this one, it was still fun and immersive. I definitely thought it was worth it, and if you're someone who hasn't touched on it yet because you're skeptical, please, trust me, you won't regret it. Unless you're not ahead on the plot because there are a lot of fucking spoilers there. But now it's time to move on to something I'm a little less positive about, which is a separate mode that takes place after the war. It's not based on any particular material, so it's basically video game filler. Now before I move on, I would like to warn you all that I might come off as bitchy and ranty for the next couple of minutes, so just keep in mind that it doesn't necessarily mean I feel more negatively towards this game than positively, it just means my issues are very extensive. Anyway, adventure mode is fucking boring. I don't even think it was necessarily a bad idea. It was essentially meant to be a breeding room after the war, as the characters live their days and jerk each other off. I really like the music, it's kind of sentimental but in a light-hearted, relaxing and ambient way. My personal beef with this mode has to do with the fact that, for one, there are no voices. I will forever rehash this point. One of the things that gave life to Ultimate Contest was the voice acting. I'm not nearly as invested only seeing a bunch of text bubbles and anime noises. I want to hear what they're actually fucking saying. And I know it would be more expensive to hire them for those recordings with not much potential return, which is probably why they abandoned voice acting during meaningless missions. I also don't like how limited the open world is. The village itself is fairly big, but you can't even jump. Like, literally you can't jump, as if removing the other features from Storm 1 and PS2 games wasn't already annoying. And you can't even travel. Well, I mean, you can technically move to other locations, but it's all instantly. Sure, it's more convenient, but it's not as fun and fulfilling as running around and exploring areas in between key locations. The other thing that really pisses me off is the fights you have to occasionally engage in are just really boring, especially the ones that are just callbacks to previous fights from the previous games. I do like the part 1 flashbacks mainly because some of them actually use music from Heroes history, which is pretty fucking cool. But the ones from Shippuden are completely unnecessary. Aside from maybe Hinata vs Pain, I don't need to relive the other ones. I can literally just revisit those games and the result will be much more gratifying. I thought that was the whole point of releasing a remaster for the PlayStation 4. Like, if you're going to implement memory fragments, don't force us to experience them as requirements for completing the main missions because I don't want to play either of them, again with the exception of part 1 events. I guess that's pretty much all I have to say about this wasted mode. They released the DLCs that allow you to experience adventure mode from the perspective of other characters, and everything I said before pretty much applies here as well. I do actually want to talk more about the DLCs because I was a little bit disappointed. I'll go a little more in depth with the Road to Boruto one, but with the rest of them, I didn't necessarily think the content they provided was bad, albeit I think they were a little too pricey for the few things they were offering, but I'm more so disappointed by what they didn't provide. You know what I wanted? I was hoping to relive the days of the PS2 games, when I could play as Anko, Kurenai, and Shizune. You gave us the Sound 4 but not those three. Like, why? What about Kurotsuchi, Kojuro, Akatsuchi, and the other previously support-only characters that are now gone because they would overlap with this leader swap mechanic? Why not give them the courtesy of making them actually selectable characters? Am I the only one who thinks it's a bit weird that you can play as Iruka Sensei but not fucking Kurenai? I also have a few nitpicks. It's kind of dumb how Naruto and Sasuke from the last can only activate their tag team ultimate jutsu when they're wearing either their primary or secondary suits simultaneously. That's just really weird. I like the fact that Hinata and Sakura have updated movesets, but I really wish they'd receive a second update for their last costumes. I had hoped to see Naruto and Sasuke's old clothes when they were still in the academy as their alternative costumes for the PTS versions. I thought it would have been cool, but whatever, I guess. This is not really something specific to DLCs, but Storm 4 allows us to choose alternative ninjutsu and ultimates, not like how the PS2 games used to work in which characters could have ninjutsu they'd never even learned. Instead, they're more so exclusive alternatives to each of the characters, some of them just being old jutsu they used to have in the previous games but later got replaced. This was pretty cool of them, but when it came to part 1 characters, unfortunately the old ninjutsu from Storm 1 that you would typically have to unlock in Ultimate Adventure in order to get them, they were not included here. I don't know why. It would have been a great opportunity, but I guess they missed it. But now let's get to Road to Boruto, and I like it. I mean, I'm glad I own it, but what the fuck happened? They overlooked so many things. Like, the main villain Momoshiki isn't even playable. Same with Kenshiki, Shikadai, that Ganin I don't remember, Konohamaru as an adult. Like, these are characters built into the game. You can play against them, but not in free battle. Like, I don't get it. Where are the other next generation characters? I don't particularly care for most of them, but still, where are they? Why didn't you provide to us the Boruto era costumes for the adult characters? You did it for Gaara and Sakura, why not everyone else? You don't even have to update their movesets, just give them the costumes. You've already designed them for the mode itself. I can see CG asset of Tamaru with her purple dress. I get the feeling that it's because she and other characters weren't required to be playable in the mode itself, unlike Gaara for instance, but I mean, I don't remember playing with Sakura, but she got a costume update. As for the story mode in specific, I mean, it was fun, I guess. It felt refreshing playing with new characters. I really liked the ultimates they gave to them. They're very flashy and lively. Experiencing the story of Boruto movie was good, but I feel like there were some moments that could have been enhanced if they had a better built open world, mainly during the Chunin exams. They also reverted back to the classic dialogue bubble skipping system, which, while there were some that weren't like that, they were still present. They also became guilty of the issue I had with Storm 2's lip syncing, because regardless of what I might think of the varying quality of the lip syncing present in some of the cutscenes in the main story mode, I feel like the lip movements still try to match the exact words coming out of their mouths, and that's the issue I had with some of the dialogue in Storm 2 and now also present in Road to Boruto, which is that it doesn't even try to do that. Usually when this happens, they try to cover it up by placing the scenes in angles that make it harder to notice the lip movements, so I guess I'll give them that. And like I said before, there are cutscenes where this isn't really a problem and it flows very well. At the very least, the cutscenes look better than what they had done before and are on par with the quality of the boss battle sequences in terms of resolution. I do feel like they were a little too bright, but whatever, I guess. Personally, I'm not super invested in Boruto as a franchise, so the experience of playing through this story wasn't really that gratifying, but I thought it was delivered well enough. It was a pretty faithful adaptation of the movie. There's a bit of sloppy audio mixing and some minor glitches here and there, although when I replayed one of the buggy events, it wasn't glitchy anymore, so I may need more extensive testing just to be sure how abundant those bugs actually are. The mode does get very exciting once Momoshiki arrives, and after that it's an absolute blast. So while I didn't like this nearly as much as the main story mode, it was by and large a fun, serviceable experience. although I will say that it gets really fucking tedious after finishing the main storyline. The side missions aren't as pointless as revisiting fights from the previous games, as when the characters reminisce of the time as kids or teenagers, they tend to orchestrate events that are original to the game, basically the equivalent of filler material, although I am more willing to tolerate that than what adventure mode has to offer. But there are still a handful of missions that are just huge fucking drag, like the VR facility. Oh my god. The worst part is that I have to finish those missions so that I can unlock the actual final boss battle in the game. Online mode is fine for the most part. It doesn't have any particularly special mode. You have your basic ranked matches, tournaments, leagues, fucking whatever. I do wish they had added the Ninja World Tournament from Revolution. I think it would have been cool to play that against online people, but whatever I guess. There's also Endless, but I've never played it, so I can't tell how fun it actually is. I don't really bother touching on the offline challenges because I don't care. I kind of like the idea of Ninja Treasure Exchange, although I am very disappointed they removed the customizing features from Revolution. Not that they were all that great or complex to begin with, but still, I didn't ask you to remove it. Also, the game often crashes every time the connection goes to complete shit, which is not very nice. I wish it wouldn't do that. It also kinda sucks that in order to go to main menu, it has to perform some downloads here and there, so every time my internet provider is having one of those days, I'm better off just disconnecting my PS4 from the internet because it'll take forever to finish loading. Now that we're talking about overly specific details, they updated the sound effects, especially kicks and punches, which is pretty nice. I like the title screen when you have the Road to Boruto DLC installed with adult Naruto as Hokage. The finishing scenes are naturally colored without any filter added in like before, which depending on which atmosphere you value the most, you'll either appreciate this change or not. I personally like the fact that I can see pictures much more clearly now. I'm glad that they changed Kid Obito and Kid Kakashi's voices because I think they sound better when they're not voiced by the regular adult voice actors. We finally have a version of Madara that doesn't just rely on his Susanoo blade, which is Rigoro Madara, and he actually has a chance to show off some of his taijutsu skills, and his ability to use limbo clones is pretty fucking insane. 6-Path Sage Mode Naruto can pull off his classic Uzumaki Naruto Rendan from back in part 1, which is a small little reference but still pretty cool. Speaking of which, something I find to be fascinating about the Storm games is the occasional original moves that they give to characters that had never been showcased in either the anime or manga, like the fact that Hinata can launch twin Lion Fist blasts. Storm 4 has a few cases of this, some noteworthy ones being Itachi and Shisui's perfect Susanoo, which is fucking crazy. It's kinda weird seeing Itachi without his Yara mirror, but hey. Naruto from the last can summon 5,000 clones and pull off a Gosen Randan, which is a whole new level of insanity. Whenever you finish an online or offline battle, it gets pre-recorded just in case you want to keep the gameplay footage, and you're asked if you want to keep the recording or not, which in turn allows you to record matches without needing to capture them yourself manually. Previous Storm games had a little issue where every time players were awakened, the frame rate would drop every time. This is one of the reasons why I didn't pick Awakening type in Storm Revolution. Literally, your strongest arsenal of attacks requires the game to slow down a little bit. Storm 4 doesn't have this problem. I've heard reports of frame rate dropping in the PST, but at least when it comes to PS4, I don't have this problem. Interestingly enough, Neji and Hinata had this thing back in Storm 3 where they could drain their opponent's chakra by activating Rotation, Protective 8 Trigram 64 Palms, or just by awakening their Byakugan. Here in Storm 4, I guess after realizing that this was perhaps a little too OP, they limited to only awakening states, which I'm glad, partially because it gives Hinata's awakening more value, especially after they had implemented her twin Lion Fist into her melee combos, to the point where having it always activated isn't that special anymore. But with awakening tools and the exclusive benefits of sucking away your opponent's chakra, it sort of compensates. On a similar subject, Chakra Dashes have sort of a second phase now when you hold it for long enough, which will boost the speed of your dashes. I thought that was useful. I think it's cool that both Adventure Mode and Road to Boruto allows you to enter your apartment, and Boruto in specific, whenever he's home he doesn't wear his shoes for obvious reasons, which is a nice detail they added. And I think that's it. I'm not sure if I have anything else important to say. I love the game. You've all seen my trilogy video. I'm not just gonna rehash what I said there as my closing statement. So yeah, I'm finally done covering the entire Storm legacy. It was the last Ultimate Ninja title, and I'm glad this series ended on a high note. Thanks CyberConnect 2, you did a lot for me and I respect you guys for that. I still don't fully understand some of your decisions, but damn it, you've earned my respect and I'll try to follow your future projects. Some of them looking pretty damn cool. Although I probably won't actually play either of them unless they get discounted. There are some other games released after Storm 4 and made by other developers that feature Naruto characters, mainly Shinobi Striker and Jump Force, but I'm not too keen on either of them. Right now I'm just gonna keep an eye on some other franchises that seem to have much more promising titles lined up. For now, I think my journey with Naruto ends here, unless I feel the need to talk about some other licensed games that don't belong in the Ultimate Ninja franchise, or maybe some of the PSP or early PS2 UN games, but that's not very likely, and unless I change my mind, my road ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye for now.